Hello and welcome again to Dimka's Woodworks. My name is Dima. In this episode we're going to turn a bolt action pen, and I'm going to go through the process how I do. You don't necessarily have to follow my process. There are different ways of turning the Antler, but this is just the way I do it. So let's get started. So before you get started with the pen, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you have all your materials ready. In this case, you've got your bolt action pen kit that comes as a set. Then you want to make sure you have the bushings for that style pen and the drill bit that's the size of that tube. And in this case, it's a 3/8 drill. This is the drill bit that came with the kit. I don't really like it. I'd like to use a brad point, but for this point, this drill bit will work fine. And then you're going to need the barrel trimmer to fit the tube. And of course, you're going to need Antler. Of course, this process will work for anything, wood, acrylic, but for this video, I'm going to use Antler. So you can use the instructions that come with the kit. I've turned quite a few of these that I don't have to use the instructions anymore, but if this is your first kit, you might want to read through the instructions. It tells you what size drill bit to use and how to turn it. And of course you're going to need your turning tools. For the Antler you could use the high-speed steel. They work fine. I go with carbide. Sometimes it just cuts a little bit cleaner. But using your high-speed steel tools, and by the way, mine aren't very that expensive, so I should show you that you don't have to have expensive tools to turn Antler. So tools are very important. Dust collection, because the Antler does smell. For this video, I'm not going to use it, but if you have a dust collection system, you might want to use it. It smells really bad. So the first thing you want to do is you want to cut the Antler long enough to fit your tube in there. You want to make sure you've picked the straightest part, so that way when you turn it you don't have any of those defects. Even though it does add a little bit to the character of the pen, but I like to have the whole thing consistent. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this on the bandsaw, and I'm going to show you how I do that. So here we are at the bandsaw. What I like to do is I like to cut the length of the rough, the rough length, so that way I can start squaring it up. Let's go ahead and drill so we can slide and glue in our tube. Now at this point you also want to be careful, because depending on where you drill, you want to drill at a spot where you're going to turn it down. So if you got blank, so I'm not necessarily going to drill dead center. I'm going to drill it off center because it's kind of curved a little bit, so drilling it off center will actually drill it at the center here. And that's what I want. So here we are at the drill press. I've already got my 3/8 bit mounted in my drill press. I'm just going to go ahead and drill it. Like I said, I'm going to drill it off the center a little bit, so right about here. So that way when it does come down, it's going to be mainly in material. It's not always a good idea to hold the blank while you're drilling it, unless you have a special dedicated vise, but then again it's not a really straight surface. So what I usually do is I just hold it with my pliers, because I do have a flat bottom here, so what I just do is I just set it down on that flat bottom, and then I go ahead and drill it. So as you can see, after drilling it the way I wanted through the center, it actually broke through on the other side in a way that I didn't want it. So what I had to do is I just had to cut a different piece, and this one's already drilled and ready. So all I gotta do is glue in my tube and we're ready to go. So I just use regular medium super glue to glue my tubes into my blanks. And really there is no right or wrong way to do it. You can use epoxy. I just put a little bit inside and then a little bit on the tube, and then I just shove it in there. So after I glue the tube in there, I just let it sit for a little bit, and then we can move on to the next step. So after a few minutes, the CA glue is set. We're going to go ahead and use the barrel trimmer and trim off the ends. Again, I use some kind of vise to hold the blank because you don't want it to spin in your hand. And now we can trim off the other end. Man, that antler is not really easy to trim. So pretty much what you do is you trim the ends off until the barrel starts to shine. That means you touch it just a little bit. You don't have to go overboard. As you can see, I burned the ends, but they'll be covered up there, so that's going to get turned away. So now that we got both ends of the barrel trimmed up, so I like to turn all my stuff between centers. So now that we got it all mounted up, we can go ahead and start turning it. So when you're turning Antler, you always want to make sure you have the proper eye protection, and you always want to make sure you have good ventilation. This stuff does stink. Make sure your tools are sharp, because if they're not sharp, you have high chance that it's going to catch and chip off too much of it. So I'm going to start turning it, and then we'll move on to the next step. So see, I'm starting to get it more round. And you can also see all that dust that's flying up. You don't want to be breathing this stuff in. So it's best to use a dust collector if you have one. Alright, there we are. We're getting closer to the finished piece. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the carbide tools, just because they're better to cut with. So at this point, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start bringing the ends closer to the finished size, which is down to the bushings. I'm going to try not to touch the bushings, but it's not always that easy. So here we are. I got a lot closer to the finished barrel. There's some minor touching up to do. I've got some. I think I'm going to sand it a little bit before I apply a finish on it. So here we go. We got the finished product here. The next step to do is to sand it up and then polish it up. So here I got some 600 grit wet sandpaper. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up, and then I'm going to take the micro mesh and I'm going to go up to 2400 grit, going at 15, 1800, and then 2400 grit. Always make sure you wipe it down between sanding to eliminate the scratches. So now we got the 1500 grit. 1800 grit. And then 2400 grit. So once you got it all sanded up, we can go ahead and apply a couple coats of the friction polish. There we go, we got one coat. And you can put as many coats as you want. I like to put 2 because that gives me a protective finish, but it also gives me that antler feel. So your final inspection, and that actually looks pretty good to me. Now you just let it cure for a little bit and you're ready to assemble it. So after letting the friction polish set a little bit, we can go ahead and start putting the pen together. I just use my drill press. I have a special, bit I put inside there, and I just use this to put it, to press everything together. This works for me. If you have a pen press, it works too. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching this video on how to make a bolt action pen out of Antler. If you found this video useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe to my channel. Well, have fun in the shop, and see you next time.